On that very day when Jesus breathed his last, something unusual happened to the earth. It wasn't just the people who felt sadness or shock, nature itself seemed to react. As Jesus died on the cross, the ground began to tremble.
Imagine standing outside and suddenly feeling the earth shake beneath your feet.
Trees swayed, and stones split apart as if the very world was crying out. This shaking was not an ordinary earthquake that sometimes happens during storms or other natural events. Instead, it felt as if the whole creation was showing its sorrow for the loss of someone very special, a person whose life and death were unlike any other. The trembling ground, the cracking rocks, and the deep rumble in the air all told a story. The earth was saying goodbye in its own powerful way. People in the nearby towns looked around in amazement and fear. They had never seen the ground move like this before. It was as if the world was trying to speak to them. The trembling and cracking of the rocks seemed to be a signal that something extraordinary had just taken place. In that moment, nature and man were connected by a shared grief and a hint of hope that something new was about to begin. This earthquake was like a message from the earth. It said, "Something so important has happened that even I, the ground, cannot stay silent." It reminded everyone that the world around them was not just a collection of trees, rocks, and soil. It was alive, and it felt the impact of great events. When you think about it, if the earth can respond to something as deep as the sacrifice of Jesus, then surely something miraculous must be unfolding. Even though the trembling of the ground was frightening, it was also a sign of something bigger. The earthquake was not random. It was a symbol, a clear sign that the death of Jesus was not the end but a dramatic turning point in the story of life and hope. The earth itself seemed to mourn, and in its mourning, it hinted at a future filled with promise. This moment was the beginning of a new chapter in which even nature would join in the celebration of life that was soon to come. As the shaking slowly stopped, people began to realize that the world they knew was changing. The quiet that followed was heavy with the understanding that this was not just an ordinary day. The trembling earth had spoken, and its message was clear. Something amazing was about to happen, something that would bring new life and hope to everyone. In that silent pause, hearts filled with a mix of wonder, fear, and the promise of a new dawn. Not long after the earth stopped shaking, another astonishing event took place. In the city of Jerusalem, the stone doors that closed off ancient tombs suddenly moved. These tombs had been sealed for many years, holding the bodies of people who had lived faithful lives. On this day, those tombs were opened wide, and the long-resting dead began to stir. Imagine walking through the streets of Jerusalem and seeing tombs with their heavy stone lids rolling away. Out of these dark, silent places, people who had died many years ago started to come out. They were not angry or confused. They seemed peaceful, as if they had been awakened from a deep sleep. These were the people God had chosen, a special group of saints and heroes from long ago, now given a chance to show that life was stronger than death. The sight of these once quiet tombs opening was both mysterious and beautiful. For many who witnessed it, the event was hard to understand, but it was impossible to ignore. The opening of the tombs was a powerful symbol. It showed that the death of Jesus had broken the hold that death once had over life. Even though the earth had been shaken, a greater shaking was happening in the hearts of those who believed that life would return. The people of Jerusalem talked about the strange event for many days. They wondered why the tombs had opened and what it meant. Some thought it was a miracle, a clear sign that God was at work, turning the sorrow of death into the joy of life. Others saw it as a mystery that pointed to a future when death would no longer be the end. These opened tombs became a visible reminder that life was more powerful than death. They told the story of a promise that had been made long ago, a promise that even when our loved ones pass away, there is hope for a new beginning. In plain language, it was as if God was saying, death is not the final chapter. There is more to life, a life that never truly ends. The scene in Jerusalem was like a scene from a dream. The silent heroes of the past, now risen, walked among the living for a short time, sharing their gentle, unspoken message of hope. They came as messengers, proving that the sacrifice made on the cross had changed everything. Their appearance was a clear sign that something wonderful was happening, a sign that a new way of understanding life was coming to all people. In simple terms, the open tombs showed everyone that the power of Jesus' love and sacrifice was greater than death itself. It was a promise that no matter how deep the night of sorrow may seem, a bright new day of hope is always on the horizon. After the earth had trembled and the tombs had opened, the most incredible part of the story unfolded. Jesus rose from the dead. Early in the morning, people discovered that the tomb where Jesus had been laid was empty. Instead of the lifeless body they expected, they found that Jesus was alive. He had come back to life. This resurrection was not just a simple return to life. It was a transformation that showed that Jesus was no ordinary man. His rise from the dead was a powerful sign that death had been defeated. It confirmed that the sacrifice he made on the cross was more than a final act. It was the beginning of a new way of living for everyone. The people who saw Jesus after his resurrection were amazed and filled with hope. They saw in him a promise that death was not the end but a doorway to a new, everlasting life. For many, it was a moment that changed their lives forever. They understood that if Jesus could rise again, then their own lives, too, could be transformed by his love and grace. Jesus appeared to his friends and followers, comforting them and showing them that he was alive. His presence was warm and encouraging, and it gave people the courage to believe in the promise of eternal life. In a simple and clear way, Jesus taught them that death no longer had the final word. Instead, life would always find a way to shine through, even in the darkest times. This miraculous event became the cornerstone of hope for everyone who believed in him. It meant that even though the world might be filled with hardships and sorrow, the promise of new life was real. Jesus' resurrection was a sign of victory, a victory over the power of death and a promise that every believer would one day share in that same triumph. In everyday language, the resurrection of Jesus tells us that no matter how sad or difficult life may seem, there is always hope for a new beginning. It reminds us that love and life are stronger than death, and that the promise of a brighter future is always with us. Even as these great miracles were unfolding, another event was happening in the temple that told a powerful story. In the sacred temple, there was a thick, heavy curtain called a veil. This veil separated the part of the temple where God's presence was thought to dwell from the rest of the building where people gathered. It stood as a reminder that ordinary people could not easily come near God. But on that extraordinary day, something amazing occurred. At the very moment when Jesus died, the veil was torn in two, from top to bottom. This was not just a tear in fabric, it was a sign that the way to God had been opened up for everyone. The heavy barrier that had once kept people at a distance was suddenly gone, replaced by a wide-open path to God's loving presence. When the veil was torn, it sent a clear message. Through Jesus' sacrifice, the gap between God and people had been removed. It was a sign that no one was too far from God's love, and that everyone now had direct access to him. This change was a sign of a new beginning, one where faith was no longer limited by old rules and barriers. For those who had grown up with the idea that only priests or a few chosen ones could approach God, this was a wonderful surprise. The torn veil meant that every person, no matter who they were, could come close to God with trust and confidence. It was as if Jesus, through his suffering and death, had broken down an old wall and built a new bridge of hope and love. In simple words, the tearing of the veil showed that Jesus' death was not just about suffering, but about opening a new door for all of us. It was a sign that everyone, young and old, rich and poor, they knew that something very important had happened. The old ways were gone, and a new era had begun, one filled with the promise of direct and personal connection with God. The torn veil was a symbol that the separation between heaven and earth had been removed, and that every person was invited to be part of God's family. In the days and weeks that followed these amazing events, the shaking earth, the open tombs, the risen Jesus, and the torn veil, a bright new hope began to spread among all people. Everyone who had heard these events understood that something wonderful had changed forever. The message was clear: through Jesus' love and sacrifice, death had lost its power, and life would go on forever. People started talking about how nothing could ever be the same again. They shared the good news with their neighbors, friends, and family. The story of Jesus' resurrection reminded everyone that even when life seems full of sadness and loss, there is always a promise of a new beginning. It was a promise that every tear would be wiped away, and that one day, pain and death would be no more. This new hope reached into every corner of the community. Children learned that the story of Jesus was a story of courage, love, and the triumph of life over death. Adults found comfort in knowing that the sacrifice of one man had brought a promise that could never be taken away. Old and young alike were united in the belief that the future held the light of eternal life. For many, This hope was like a bright lamp shining in the dark. It showed them that no matter what challenges they faced, there was a way forward, a way to overcome sorrow and to live in the promise of a better tomorrow. The promise of eternal life meant that every person was part of a bigger plan, one that stretched far beyond this world and into the life that never ends. In everyday language, the new hope meant that love was stronger than fear, that life was stronger than death, and that every person could be close to God. It was a simple but powerful message. You are loved, you are important, and your story is not finished. Even when life is hard, there is always a new day waiting, filled with the promise of joy, peace, and the everlasting light of God's love. This hope continues to inspire people today. It teaches us that no matter our age or background, we all share in the same promise of a bright future. The events of that fateful day remind us that from the greatest sadness can come the most wonderful hope, a hope that is open to everyone and that brings us together in a family of love and faith.
And so, the story goes on.
The message of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is passed down from generation to generation, a story that speaks to every heart. It is a reminder that when the world trembles and the old barriers fall away, a new and beautiful future is born, a future filled with hope, love, and the promise that every ending is just the start of something even greater. If this story has taught you something new today and touched your heart, comment "Jesus, I love you" in the comment section and make sure to subscribe. Thank you.